This is the BBC. Hello. In 1789, the Bastille was stormed, King Louis XVI was put under National Guard, and the calendar was turned back to zero. The French Revolution began its upheavals in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity. On this side of the English Channel, there were those who thought bliss it was that dawned to be alive, but the statesman and philosopher Edmund wasn't among them. He said, "The age of chivalry is gone. That of sophisters, economists, and calculators has succeeded, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever."
Good morning, ADOS. What's the deal? It's your girl, Pernator Poet. Excuse me. Good morning, good afternoon, good day to you. Thank you for being here with us on Reconstruction. Today, we're going to be addressing color people time in the Twilight Zone and the winners writing the history, being in control of the timing of the history. So today, color people time, not BIPOC time, not people of color time. I'm talking about color people time. That's CP time. That's how we call it. That's what we've always described it as. And I've always had this sneaking suspicion that something is wrong with time. And from my studies, I find that I'm not so wrong. Excuse me, y'all. Got something stuck in my throat. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through a couple of sources, and I'm going to try my best to show you my understanding of how time is being manipulated historically by the winners. And, you know, it's a bit much on the brain, I'm telling you, because I've been trying to make this video for about 3, 4, 5 months now, because to understand, to wrap your mind around the bullshit and the same stories being told over and over and over again in different languages, in different countries, in different time periods, it makes it confusing, and it was made to be confusing. But I'm hoping that this will simplify the idea and the construct of time, so that when you out there reading, you can construct it for yourself, that you can see that it's so you can construct it for yourself and make sense of it for yourself, okay? And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some sources to back up why I say that time's been distorted. And when I refer to time, you might hear me say stuff like temporal, which just means another word for time, like tempo. And who controls the time in these documents, things like that. And so what we're going to do is go through some sources, and I'm going to show you how I adjust things to get a better understanding of historical narratives and people, places, and things, events, wars, the slave trade, chattel slavery, supposed long time ago slavery, which I find to be inaccurate. And then I'm going to try to show you how I apply it. And I'm going to show you a couple of resources that I use to help me see through it, because it's straightforward. And so that's kind of what we're going to do today. And so let's go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at John Ridpath's History of the World. And I have it up for you here. So we're going to get right into this. So now John Ridpath wrote this, he wrote several books back in the late 1800s about all the things that were, about the whole thing with the time. I'm so sorry, family, excuse me. And so what he came to a conclusion, what he found was there was a man named James Ussher who basically claimed that he constructed a time chronology from the Bible, right? And the thing that what he did was claim that he did it. He didn't necessarily have the best, or he just claimed that he did it. That was the thing. He could claim that he constructed it from the biblical text. And from him claiming that, everybody went with that. And so he goes on to say here that he tells you about who James Ussher was when he wrote, was around the time, 34 um 34 years after the death of Martin Luther, the Protestant Reformation person guy. So many years, Louis the 14th, you're dealing with something being done in the 1600s, basically. And so when you start looking at this and who constructed this and why they constructed it that way and why people are still following it, you find from what Ridpath says here is that basically, if you look at the top right in yellow, it's basically he says that this chronology was imposed on the sacred books in some unknown manner without the sanction of any ecclesiastical authority. So without any church authority, they just started printing it in the books, claiming that it was the the correct chronology. And people just went with it. I'm not sure if so many people contested it, but as far as America and Europe especially, they went with it. So he goes on to say, the audacity, here in this pink box is where he's pretty much talking about James Ussher and how down as late as 1825, in our current times, in real times, what I like to call it, that people are supposing that they're claiming that the world was created exactly on Sunday at the autumnal equinox on Sunday, October the 3rd, that Adam and Eve were created on a Friday, October the 28th, right? So God created the earth on this Sunday, this particular Sunday, and that Adam and Eve were created on this particular Friday. And none of these people were there to witness it. None of these people were there. They can claim they have all these books and da 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 da, but you're talking about thousands and thousands of years ago, for which none of us, even James Ussher, and the people at Oxford, the people at Harvard, the people at Stanford, the people at Princeton, the people at all these other prestigious universities all around Europe and America, none of them were there to see. But yet, because of the way that it was, it was put into, whatever means they'd use. Obviously, if you have money to print books en masse, you can probably get people to believe things because it's written down in a book. And nobody has the internet. Nobody has internetarchive.org to go look at all these books. Access is an issue, So controlling the narrative that way, back in these times, people were still farming and subsisting, herding, and, they weren't, there were no telephone cords, like, now in Ridpath's time, yes, but, nobody was there to see this stuff in 4004 BC on October 23rd and October 25th. So this is the construct that we're working with. This is what a lot of our history is based upon. Somebody's really skewed opinion about time. And that thing that Hitler said, you say the lie over and over and over and over again until it's the truth, or until people take it as truth, rather, because it's not true. To claim, so it's a really audacious claim is basically what he's saying. And I totally agree. Like, I won't say that everything that he says is right in his book, but I do agree with him here. So let's keep going and I'm going to show you what he's talking about on how these things came and how they affect us even today, 2022. So here, in the yellow to the left, where it says almost every branch of historical inquiry has been checked and impeded by the preconceived opinion that there exists a system of biblical chronology for antiquity to which all events since the appearance of man must be conformed. You understand? So it must be this way. They have to make it fit. So you can talk about the Aryan invasion of India. You could talk about all these these are theories now. The Aryan theory of some invasion in India, the Bantu theory of invasion of Africa. These things are all place within this 400, this whole same time, biblical chronology for antiquity. Otherwise, the little system breaks apart, and they've had debates, and they throw little fits. I mean, they're big fits, but they've thrown big fits about people trying to move this thing around. You know what I mean? Trying to place something before it or after it or between it that they don't want in this time scheme. And I'm talking about Oxford, Harvard, Princeton. Everybody's aware of this. Major universities, NASA, they're all in on this biblical chronology that has to be in place. Otherwise, white supremacy time periods fall apart. Rome falls apart. Greek falls apart. It all falls apart, and it should, because it's false. Like, it's deceptive. It's not based on actual truth, and that's just, my opinion of it. But I have some things to back up these opinions, and so we'll go on. And so on the right side, okay, so at the midpoint, about the second part in yellow, where it says, after the dispersion of the Jews and up to the 15th century, that people employed in their business affairs and secular records what is called the era of Seleucidae. That is the year BC 311. It's a very important date with all of this. Then he says, but since the 15th century, the Israelites have fallen back upon the interpretation of the Hebrew text for the era of the world, fixing that event at the year of 3760 BC. Notice how the BC moved from the back to the front. Meanwhile, we're in the orange part now. Meanwhile, the Greek Christians of Russia and the East adopted for themselves what is known as the era of Constantinople, which places the creation of the world in the year 5509 BC and makes the Christian era coincident with the 4th of the 194th Olympiad. There is also what is known as the era of Alexandria, which placed the creation in the year of 5500 BC. It's not that you have to memorize these dates. These are just points in time that have been used for this major manipulation. So we'll continue on. All right. So he created a chart to kind of help you see. And I think it's a very useful chart because, the writing, it just kind of breaks it all down right there. And if there's nothing else, I just want you to see a couple of things. So focus in on the yellow, the pink, and the orange. And so at the top of it in yellow, it says the year 4004 BC, right? That's supposed to be the era of creation. And then it shows you what it corresponds to. Okay, we jump down to where it says the founding of Rome, which is the third block down. If you look at the pink, where it says the year 2545 before the French era. Dealing with the French here, we're dealing with, basically the people who did this. The French government, or the French church officials, or the French, the conquerors, basically, whoever, this whole dynamic with the French. Okay, so next, in the fourth one, we're going to read the yellow, where it says the common or Christian era corresponds to the year 4004 of the era of creation. And if you go down to the bottom yellow one, it says it corresponds to, so the common or Christian era corresponds to the year 1792 of the French era. All right. Now, go down to the next one. We're going to bring like the Islamic timing into this, because they use the Islamic timing to basically fade in, like to hide their hands on things. I don't have anything against Islam or any religion at all. It's just the writers of the history created this system. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so the Hijra corresponds to, and the Hijra has to do with the Prophet Muhammad either being exiled or, making a pilgrimage or something like that. It's basically coming into how the Islamic religion or the Muslim religion was, how it came into being. And so if you go down to the orange one in that section, you'll see that the year of the Hijra corresponds to 1206 before the French era. If you go down to the next block, so it says the era of the French Republic, right? Republic, not the French Emirate, not the French dynasty, not the French kingdom, emperorship, the French Republic. That corresponds to the year 1792 of the Christian era. It also corresponds to the year 2545 of the founding of Rome, and it also corresponds to the year 1206 of the Hijra. Okay, so you're saying, so what we're saying is, what I'm saying is, if you take history and you kind of organize it within the last block, right, with the French Republic. So when you see things that say BC, you can basically take whatever that BC is and subtract it from 1792, because that's the French, that's what the French Republic corresponds to in the Christian era, right? Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert on this. This is just something that I read and it made sense to me. You know, you can always tell me like, hey, Adrian, no, this is wrong, or consider this, or let's try this. I'm open to, you know, constructive criticism, questioning, because it's very confusing. But so far, this makes sense for me, to me, because of other sources and how they discuss time, history, and how it all starts to converge at a certain point, and it has to do with this French Republic being founded in 1792. So let's keep going. All right, so the first thing I'm going to show you on how I kind of started to apply this was with Egypt. Oh yes, because Napoleon or the French or somebody, you know, under the guise of the French, they invaded Egypt and Ismailia, which is another area in the Egyptian Suez Canal region. The whole idea was that the French invaded Egypt around the late 1700s, around, I say like around 1785, 1792, something around there is when the French invaded Egypt, right? Okay, so stick with me. And you know that the French have a relationship with Algeria as far as colonizing Algeria. So I just wanted to note this. So I know it's a lot on the page, but if you look at the part where it says where it says the section where it says last native dynasties, if you go down to the blue where it says the three X's, XXX meaning the 30th dynasty, which is called the Sabini dynasty or the Sabinite dynasty, and it says BC 350, right? So from my calculation, now this is just from my understanding with what I just showed you. If you take 350, subtract that from 1792, you're going to get 453, which corresponds to some other dates that are really important for our history, for the history of the world to understand, as far as what happened, when, where it happened, who they said did it, Rome, Greece, and all these other creations dealing with real hard written history prior to the French Republic. Okay, so just again, the that 30th dynasty, which says the last native dynasty, the Sabini dynasty, the ITE can be pronounced as E, like it's really the TE is kind of extra, so it's Sabini. Okay, and so 350 BC minus 1792, you're going to get 1453 in what I call real time, or before the French era, because that's literally what we're subtracting there. So let's keep going. I kind of got a little summary for you next. Okay, so like I said, if the common era corresponds to 1792, and I put 1803 because that's when the French Revolution occurs. So some of the dates do correspond to the 1803, but so I include some. It just, you have to work with it. You know, it's a mold. It's not a perfection thing per se. It's just to get you in the right time period between these between these 10, 11 years of them saying before the common era or before Christ. Okay. And so that era of Seleucidae. that BC 311. If you take that 311 subtracted by both of these numbers, the 1792 or the 1803, you get 1481 or you'll get 1492. And what happened in 1492? Okay, I ain't gonna even say the shit because it don't make no, these things just, it appalls me, like, as an adult person, that we dealing with the childishness in our history, but it is what it is. Okay, so back to the list. So the era of Constantinople, which would if you the era of Constantinople. Why did I get the era of Constantinople? What's that one coming to play? Oh, it's with the 311 BC. If you subtract it from, hold on, guys, sorry. Okay, yeah. If you look at the bottom, sorry, I see what I did. If you look at the bottom where it says the 350, so it's just basically me saying the same thing from the last one. The last native Egyptian dynasty, BC 350 or 1453, which corresponds to the fall of Constantinople, which the Greek Christians or the Oriental Christians, that's what they call this time period, right? And so you have the Western system and you have the Eastern system, but that doesn't mean that they aren't working in concert, especially when you throw the writers and the creators of Islamic history and timing into the mix. So I just wanted y'all to see that. So that that last Egyptian dynasty, 350, corresponds with the 1453. When you subtract that from the 1792, you're gonna get 350. Okay, let's keep going. So examples. So I'm going to take it from a couple of sources that I found to illustrate the point. And they say it outright. Like, I didn't have to, once I got into this and I started playing with the numbers, it was just, I had to just start looking for it in different sources and I found it. So I found something in this titled the Indian Antiquary. And basically these are compilations by different people. And this one is compiled by Richard Carnac Temple. Okay, so here they're talking about something called the Siege of Ahmadnagar and the heroic defense of the fort by Khan Bibi, a narrative of an eyewitness, quote unquote. Okay, so I just put this part up here so you can kind of get an idea if you want to read it. It's about the Mughals or the Mughal Empire and the Mauryan dynasty. All right, so on this page here on 233, we're still dealing with the Siege of Ahmadnagar, right? So here, literally, they stated, like they put it out so you can see it. So if you look at the bottom where it says Khan, starting here right above the yellow line, Khan Bibi's husband was assassinated by a slave under discreditable circumstances on Monday, the 24th of the month of Safar, AH. AH stands for after the Hijra, which is a Islamic timing dynamic. So after the Hijra, 988 at the 8th hour of the night, corresponding to 2 a.m. on the 11th of April, 1580. And so when you look at it, so with this 1580, you subtract that from 1792, you're going to get 212. So you put 212 BC. And then you'll start to, if you go look up things that happened in 212 BC, you'll start to see things about different wars and things like that with Rome and Greece and all this other fantasy stuff they made up, when really this is closer to what they're actually talking about. But they're rewriting it, they're restating it in different time periods with different names, with different groups, with different identities, so that you can sift through and find out what they're actually talking about when they're talking about invading and like all these wars, creating these prisoners of war, right? And capturing them, and or them being sold or what have you into the slave trade, because that's what we're dealing with. We're talking about confusion being created for slavery. Like, that's how Pernet sees it, point blank period. And so you see how this year in the Hijra, 988, corresponds to about 1580, right? So 1580 minus 988 is about 592 years. So I put on the average 600. So when you're dealing with when you're dealing with time and they start talking about Islamic anything in history, right? Just remember to think about this, reflect on this, and see if you start playing with it or messing around with it, and you say like, man, this sounds like another story of something else. Go look into it. Add it back to the subtract it from that 1792 and see what you get. Okay, I'm gonna show you one more thing with this one. So here at the very top, then Ahmad Shah on Friday, this date, basically the after the Hijra 1004, corresponds to a date in 1595. You see what I'm saying? So I did I subtracted this 591 years estimated. And so I just wanted to show you like this is how this is done. And some people understand it, some maybe not, but it appears that this is how the history was constructed, depending on who's reading what part in the history. And so let's see, when Her Highness, if you look at the bottom, go down to the last paragraph where it says when Her Highness Khan Bibi obtained information of blah 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 blah. So that 212 time period, like this time period, the 1595, Queen Elizabeth was the Queen of England. So you can look at, and if you think about the British colonization in Egypt, in East Africa, in India, and South Africa, everywhere. Don't just the South Indian Islands, you'll start to see like their histories will match up with this same stuff too, depending on if they're talking about standard European history or if they're talking about the Islamic historical factor, things like that. And so just so you can see that, if you look at the very bottom, they calculated all the way out after the Hijra, the AH, 1018, boom, 1609. Okay. So let's keep going. Lastly, I took something from something more recently created, and it's called the Historic Cities of the Islamic World. And so I focused in on Sokoto. Sokoto is something I've heard. I heard about it initially when I started trying to sort out, or just get more into learning about the slave trade, who's who, what's what, where, who's doing what, who was involved, trying to get some names, trying to get some understanding with the slave trade, and this whole relationship with supposedly, that we're all from West Africa and all this here kind of stuff. And so I landed on the Sokoto Caliphate, and from the very top, if you see there where it says Sokoto, it says in Hausa is Sakawato, okay, and in Arabic it's Sakata. Boom, you got me hooked right there. Akata, who? Sakata, okay. So it was a city in northwestern Nigeria. And that's currently where the Sokoto Caliphate is based right now, 2022. And so if you look down with the first arrow on the left, you'll see where it says it was established first as a camp in 1223/1808. All right. So a lot of things happened at that point in time. So the 1223 corresponds to the Islamic Muslim understanding of the Hijra, right? So after the Hijra, and in real time and accurate time, it happened in 1808. So please know and understand that supposedly in 1807, Britain, abolished the slave trade, and America followed suit in 1808, quote unquote, which is all fantasy and fiction in my understanding, because slave trading is still going on till tomorrow morning, as I've heard some people say. But at any rate, when you look at the numbers, okay, if you go down to the second arrow where it has 1232/1817, you'll see some other things listed here about Uthman Danfodio, or Sheikh Uthman bin Fudi, excuse me, slash Usumanu Danfodio. You can write his name in different languages. That's just language changes. But if you see here that In some instances, he's called the Sheikh. Okay, so which is like Sheikh Anta Diop, right? So it's like a title kind of situation, but that Sheikh goes right with Shaka Zulu or Kshatriya in Indian writings, and that would go with military forces, wartime military officials, people who do the warring, they do the military, military leadership. Okay, so you see how those numbers go together. So I'm gonna go to one more page here. Let's see. So it just gives more. I'm not going into necessarily the history of the whole situation. I just wanted you to see that these things are understood in varying in varying writers. They include them. You see what I'm saying? And so all the way from James Ussher in the 4004 BC, God creating the earth on October 23rd, to Adam and Eve being created on October the 25th. You know, the audacity, the nerve, the sheer narcissistic, grandiose delusions of you being able to even sort out when the creator of this earth, the creator of this world, the creator of our human bodies, our earth, you put a seed in the ground and it just grows because it's designed that way to take our little finite understanding of things and try to place them into infinity. you know I don't understand necessarily how people get caught up in this, but I don't have to understand. What I'm trying to understand is slavery, the slave trade, reparations, me and mine, my family, keeping everybody safe and sound, in mind, body, soul, and spirit. And so these are the things that I find to cause, to fall, and you fall into traps. You know what I'm saying? You fall into traps trying to read about your own history when people have manipulated time. They've manipulated the temporal realm of your name, your what happened to you, what was done to you, and when, where it all happened. Moving things around, colonizing, calling people different names. Over time, changing things at their whim, just because they say so, just because they claim they did it. It's something I'm calling discovery recovery. Recovering from this mind state, these concepts, these constructs of all this bullshit about it being one person's way about something that had nothing to do with them until they showed up at your front door. You feel what I'm saying? And so, please tell me what y'all think. I really find this to be very helpful in sorting out Rome, Greece, Persia, all the nonsense. And, it really, when you talk about the French invasion with Napoleon coming to Egypt, la da 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 da, who did what, when you start looking at the Red Sea slave trade, you start looking at the Asiatic slave trade,